My name is Eli Benzion. I was born and raised in the heart of Williamsburg, Brooklyn, in an Orthodox Jewish community where every step of life was governed by the laws of the Torah and the commentaries of the Talmud. I was born blind, completely. I never saw the daylight. I never knew what my mother's face looked like beyond the warmth of her hands on my face. I grew up in an environment where faith was everything. My father was a rabbi, and so was my grandfather. From an early age, I was taught to trust in God with a devotion that bordered on rigidity. My life was a sequence of prayers, studies, and discipline. I never questioned anything. I obeyed. I became a rabbi at the age of 24, and from then on, my life followed a path that I considered sacred. But everything changed on a Shabbat night, on a Friday that began like any other, but ended as the day I died. That night, we were gathered at home. I, my brother Shmuel, and 2 students who used to spend Shabbat with us. The table was set. With the usual care, fresh challah, lit candles, wine, everything ready for the kiddush. I was reciting the blessing when I felt a slight shift of air, as if someone had bumped into the table. A second later, I heard the muffled sound of something falling, and then an unmistakable sound, the sizzling of fabric catching fire. My brother screamed, but before I grasped the gravity of the situation, the heat was already lapping at my face. I abruptly stood up, trying to smother the flames with my hands, but my blindness caused me to confuse what was on fire and what wasn't. My attempt to control the blaze only spread it further. Smoke filled the room at an absurd speed, and I began coughing like never before. Each breath felt as if it were cutting inside me, and then everything went dark, but not like before. Not like the darkness that had always been my companion. This was different. This was alive. I can't explain what that darkness was like. I only know that it was not like the blindness that had accompanied me since birth. It was something else, a thick void, as if existence itself had been erased. I didn't feel my body, yet at the same time every memory of mine vibrated as if it were being torn away from me one by one. I felt like I was falling, but it wasn't a fall governed by gravity. It was a kind of disintegration. Voices began to arise around me. They whispered things in a language I did not know, yet somehow I understood. Each word was a weight on my soul. I felt naked, not physically but spiritually, as if my entire life were being scrutinized by invisible eyes, eyes that saw beyond my intentions. For the first time I realized that something was wrong with me, but I didn't know what. Suddenly the space where I was floating or sinking, I'm not sure, began to move, not like a physical place, but as if reality itself were being dragged along. I was led by a force to which I could not resist. Gradually I began to hear laments, muffled cries, sounds that seemed to come from within me and others at the same time. When I realized it, I was facing a structure made of doors, hundreds of them, floating in the midst of nothingness. Each one carried symbols, names, languages. There was one with the symbol of the cross, another with inscriptions from the Quran, others that I can't even begin to describe. But one caught my attention, a door marked with the Star of David and the inscription, Son of Israel. Before I could think of anything, that door opened by itself and a force violently pulled me inside. The sensation was as if I were being sucked into a whirlwind made of guilt, memories, and a burning heat that hurt. I was screaming for help, but my voice seemed to dissolve into the air, and then hell was revealed. That place was not like the hell I had imagined. There were no tridents, demons, or cartoonish fire. It was much worse. The fire was there, yes, but it wasn't the kind that consumes wood or flesh. It was a fire that burned the soul, that corroded thoughts, that exposed sins hidden even from ourselves. There was a smell I will never forget, something between burned hair and old blood. Shadows walked, crawled, whispered names, accused, and among them I saw faces, familiar ones. Rabbis, men I respected, leaders I admired. They were there, contorting as if every second were an eternal cycle of repentance too late. one of them turned to me with empty eyes and whispered, "You are like us." That tore me apart. The phrase was not said in anger. It was said with sorrow, as if recognizing a brother who had lost his way on the same path. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to shout that I was not like them, that I had always been faithful to the Torah, that I had never eaten anything impure, that I had respected every festival, every fast, every teaching. But there, none of that seemed to matter. The shadows surrounded me and began to show images, scenes from my life. I saw when I denied help to a neighbor because he was not Jewish. I saw when I treated a mourning woman coldly because she did not follow the proper ritual. I saw when my spiritual arrogance drove my own nephews away from the faith. And I saw something even worse, the moments when God tried to speak to me, and I simply ignored it. I wasn't evil, but I realized that I was blind in a way much deeper than the lack of sight in my eyes. My blindness was born of pride, of believing that by following rules I was saved. But there, in that place, I understood that the law without love is nothing but a gilded cage, and I was trapped in it. Amidst the chaos, I began to cry out for mercy. It was no longer the rabbi, secure in his certainties, who spoke, but a man stripped bare before everything I had never wanted to see. I was shouting God's name like never before, with desperation, with hunger, with fear, not for salvation, but for relief, for a sign that I was not condemned. It was then that a figure approached. He was like me. He wore a scorched talit, his face marked by suffering. But there was something different. In his eyes there was a definitive emptiness, as if he had already given up on any hope. He came closer and said, "You are Eli Ben-Zion. I am what you would become." I fell to my knees, or at least that is how it felt. My spirit seemed to disintegrate right there. He touched my shoulder and added, "You always thought you were righteous, but you were never humble." Then everything began to crumble. The fire around me turned into a vortex, and the voices started to fall silent. I felt as if I were being torn from that place, not by my own strength, but by something or someone who had decided that it was not yet the end. First came silence, then a gentle breeze, as if a new environment were being woven around me, and then a light appeared, not like the ones we know, with brightness and shadow. It was a light that pierced everything, even the pain, a warmth that did not burn, but soothed. For the first time, I felt peace, a peace that did not come from certainty, but from surrender. And then I saw him. Even though I had been blind my whole life, I saw him. Standing before me was someone I had never dared to acknowledge, someone whom, throughout my life, I had rejected, ignored, questioned, but who now was undeniable. Jesus. At first, he said nothing. He simply stood there looking at me with an expression that disarmed any resistance. There was no judgment, but there was also no condescension. It was a gaze that saw everything, even what I had hidden from myself. I tried to step back, to stammer something, to justify my life, my service, my faith. But before any word came out, he raised his hand and the entire room fell silent. "I know you, Eli," he said. His voice touched my soul directly, as if each syllable washed away the filth from my spirit. "I know the good you did and the evil you ignored. I saw your fidelity to the laws, but I also saw your closed heart." My chest ached as if it had been torn open. It was like standing before a mirror that revealed not what others see, but what you truly are. Then Jesus extended his hand, and as he touched my face, a wave of warmth surged through my body. But the most striking thing was not the touch. It was what I felt immediately afterward. I remembered a time when I discreetly helped a Christian family that was starving, even though I knew that it could bring trouble in my community. It was a small, forgotten gesture, but he brought it up, as if it had been the greatest act of my life. "This love, Eli, this is the path you ignored out of fear, not malice," he said. And then, before him, I broke down in tears. I cried not from sadness but from relief. For the first time, I felt forgiven. I felt that there was something beyond the letter, beyond the law, something I had never allowed into my heart: grace. And in that moment, I woke up. The first thing I sensed when I opened my eyes was the lingering smell of smoke in the air. My lungs burned, and there was a distant buzzing in my ears. But then something paralyzed me. I could see, for the first time in my life, I could see. Light, shapes, colors, everything was so absurd that it took me a few seconds to realize I wasn't dreaming. My brother Shmuel was kneeling beside me, tears streaming down his face and trembling hands gripping my shoulder. He mumbled something about the firefighters arriving in time, about nearly losing hope, but none of that made sense at that moment. What held me was the miracle that had been given to me. My brother's face, which I had imagined so many times, was right there before me, and even though it was covered in soot and despair, it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The vision was real. But as real as that was what had happened on the other side. It wasn't a dream, nor a hallucination. Something inside me screamed it with such force that I tried to stand up and run, as if the whole world needed to know. But my knees gave. Out, the transformation had begun, but I was still too fragile to sustain it. In the weeks that followed, I plunged into a kind of conflict I had never faced before. It was no longer about doctrinal doubts or theological debates. It was something intimate, overwhelming. I tried to rationalize, to argue with myself, to review every detail of the experience as if trying to find cracks in a memory. But the more I thought about it, the more real it became. His words echoed within me, especially that one about a closed heart. It gnawed at me. I, who had always believed I was a guardian of the faith, now saw myself as someone who had spent a lifetime locked out from the true love of God. And the worst was the loneliness that it caused. I couldn't tell anyone. How could I? Which rabbi would say that he had seen Jesus and returned to life with his eyes restored? I pretended that it was merely a physical miracle, something inexplicable yet clinical, and everyone accepted that with relief. But inside me there was an earthquake, and like any earthquake it would leave ruins or pave the way for something new. It was at that point that I decided to keep silent for the time being. But I also decided something even more important. I would start reading. Not only the Torah, but the New Testament as well. The first time I touched a New Testament, my hands trembled. I felt as if I were betraying everything I had been taught, as if I were desecrating my own history. But something inside me, something I could no longer ignore, said you need to see for yourself. And that's what I did. I began in secret, in the silence of the early morning, with the windows closed and the curtains drawn, as if committing a crime. And there, in that book I had spent my life ignoring, I began to find echoes of the voice that had called me in that dimension between life and death. The words of Jesus didn't sound like a new religion. They sounded like truth, as if everything I had studied before suddenly gained color, as if at last the contours of faith ceased to be mere shadows and became solid. Every parable, every gesture, every silence of his revealed something that no rabbinic discussion had ever touched: the heart of God. And gradually, I began to pray. Not those ritualistic prayers I had repeated for decades, but simple prayers, real, with faltering, confused yet honest words. And the answer came, not with thunder or signs, but with a peace I had never felt before. Even so, fear remained a constant presence. Fear of losing my community, my family, my title, fear of disappointing generations of tradition that had shaped me. The world around me did not know of the revolution taking place within. I continued wearing my kippah, giving classes, leading prayers. But inside, something moved like lava beneath a thin crust, ready to erupt at any moment. Until one day, while studying chapter 10 of John, where Jesus says he is the good shepherd who lays down his life for his sheep, Something completely broke me. I cried like a child. That was the moment I had known would come, yet had tried to delay. For the first time, I spoke aloud. Jesus, I believe. I said it softly, alone, with fear, but also with an overwhelming sense of freedom. I felt as if invisible chains had been broken. It was not just a conversion, it was a surrender. I saw myself stripped of titles, of traditions, of any pride. I was just a man before a savior, and in that instant, I knew that my life would never be the same again, and that, even with everything I would lose, I had gained everything. A few days after that prayer, something supernatural happened, and I have no other word to describe it. It was late afternoon. The sun had already hidden among the buildings of Brooklyn, and I was alone at home, reflecting, as I had been doing almost every day. The apartment was in absolute silence, and suddenly I felt a presence. Not a vague sensation, but something as real as a human being entering through the door. Except there was no door. There was light. A light that did not come from lamps but spread throughout the room like a golden cloak, gentle yet powerful. And then he appeared again, not as in visions or dreams, but there, standing in the middle of the room with the same firm look of compassion that had disarmed me in that realm between life and death. Jesus was there. I froze. I couldn't say anything. I only cried. He approached, said not a word, but extended his hand as if confirming a calling. I understood, not with my mind, but with my spirit. That was the moment of the final decision, and even though my knees trembled, I answered with my whole heart. It was the beginning of my new mission. In the months that followed, my life became a battlefield. Revealing my faith came at a steep cost. I was removed from the synagogue, my old friends stopped greeting me on the street, and some relatives simply ceased to speak to me. I received anonymous messages calling me a traitor, a heretic, lost. And there were nights when, alone, I wondered if I was crazy. But each time doubt crept in, that same peace, the one I had felt before him, enveloped me once again. It was as if he said, "I am here." Gradually, my wife began to notice the change. She said that I seemed lighter, more patient, even kinder toward others. One day, with teary eyes, she asked me, "Are you hiding something from me?" I took a deep breath and told her everything. She wept silently, but not in anger. She said that she, too, felt something different, that she had begun to question the faith we had followed without ever asking questions. Over time, she began to read with me. Today, she prays with me. My children are still small, but they already know that the light their daddy sees now is far more important than the vision he gained in that fire. Today, when I look back, it feels as though I have lived two lives. The first was marked by blind obedience, and not only with my eyes. I followed every rule, every tradition, as if walking on a path laid out by others, never lifting my head to see where it truly led. Now, I walk by faith, but with my eyes wide open. I'm not referring only to physical healing, although being able to see was an undeniable miracle. I see the colors of the world, yes, but beyond that, I see the colors of grace. I understand today that I was not saved by merit, by prayers, or by works. I was saved by love, a love I never asked for, but that was always there. I still wear my kippah, but now it is not a symbol of separation. It is a reminder of the path I took to understand that the Messiah I denied was always him. And I speak about it wherever I go, not with imposition, but with truth, with scars, because there is no testimony stronger than someone who died inside and was brought back by the light. I am that story, and I know I was left here for a reason, to share this new path. Not everyone accepts, not everyone understands, and that's okay. Sometimes a seed takes time to sprout. Sometimes it doesn't even sprout in our hands, but I continue planting. With every conversation, every gesture, every silent prayer for someone who is still in the same blindness that once enveloped me. I receive letters, messages, questions, some filled with anger, others with curiosity, others in tears. And whenever I can, I recount the tale about the night I died, about the living darkness that enveloped me, about the fire that did not burn flesh, but burned pride. I tell of the man with empty eyes who said I was just like him, and of the other man with eyes full of mercy who touched me and gave me life again. The journey was not easy. It still isn't. But now, every step has direction. Every silence has presence, and every difficulty has purpose. I am no longer the Eli who grew up in Brooklyn believing he already knew everything about God. I am just a man who had to lose everything, even his own life, to finally see. And since that day, I have never ceased to see, neither with my eyes nor with my heart.